Okay, good morning. We're on page 1152 in Ayin Beis, volume 2. Okay. And we were discussing the meaning of ayin, the word ayin from the perspective of the creation, meaning from das tachten, from the perspective from below. So in contrast to ayin from the perspective from above, from the yesh amiti, meaning the source, the creator, there ayin means insignificance, nothing. It's not teifus makim. The ayin from the perspective below means two things. One, it does not loy dover. It's not of the same substance as the yesh. And two, that it's incomprehensible to us, beyond us. It's mysterious. So, in explaining that, he's gone into now deeper discussion exactly how yesh ma'ayin works. And it's essentially a paradox. There's two things going on at once. On one hand, creation by definition means there's an infinite distance between creator and creation. And the creative process, only the creator has. You're not talking yesh mi yesh, one thing being shaped into another. There's a close relationship. Here there's a richuk ka'erech, as he put it. Richuk. On the other hand, the creation process does not happen from a distance. The process is the creator and the creative energy applies itself and encloses itself, mislabish, islapshus, into the actual creation. Koyach hapoyel benifel, the power of the producer in the product. And even as such, even when it's manifesting within it, it's in a form of concealment. So he says, this divine power is concealed within, even the level. We're not talking about the creative power that's beyond the creation, that's higher than the creation. And that's where we stopped, on top of page 1152. We'll continue from there. And just a brief word about the context. The context, of course, of this is that we're working on creating an interface, that a creation should be able to relate to its creator. So by having these stepping stones, that first there's a creative energy that is loy dover, it's not like us, but to say that it's complete ayin mamish, completely beyond us, it's also not. It's a creative energy. So we have within our existence something, existence itself indicates and guides us and directs us toward a creative energy, which in turn allows us to climb all the way to the point of levels that are beyond creation, beyond existence, all the way back to the source, which is, of course, the whole discussion of the yesh, ayin yesh, das elyon, das tachten, which we'll talk about more. But that's that, so to go, before we go, this is the macro picture, this is the micro, is right now we're discussing how the ayin, the third interpretation of pnimi, how the ayin manifests within the yesh, and at the same time remains somewhat removed from it. That's its meaning of ayin here. Okay, so it's essentially, to put it simply, it's the yesh acclimating itself, learning about ayin. Yesh learning about the ayin that is creating and energizing it. So top of page 1152, I'll continue reading. Line 1. The Zewa Hefresh is going to explain now. This is the difference between Ilav Olol the Yesh Ma'ayin. Ilav Olol simply translates cause and effect, and Yesh Ma'ayin. So even though technically Yesh Ma'ayin is also cause and effect, the Ayin is the cause, and the Yesh is the effect, but it's not cause and effect, as we're going to discuss, that's commensurate and relatable to each other. The Isavas Olol Min Ha'ila, the cause that emerges or comes into being from the ilah, the effect that emerges or comes into being from the ilah, the cause, hu b'bchinas hislapshus ha'ilah b'ha'olul. Yeah, it's in a form of islapshus of the ilah, the cause within the olul, in the effect. Zeu sha'ilah mizgala ela olul. That islapshus is not a concealed one. There, the cause reveals itself to the effect. And through the effect, comprehending and relating to the cause, it's dafka, that's precisely the process through which an effect is affected by a cause. So he's going to use the classic example of seichel and midas. Remember, when we talk seichel and midas, we're not talking about inherent, wired in seichel midas. We're talking about a seichel midas, the process of contemplating on an idea and it evoking and awakening and stimulating a feeling. That's whenever we say ilav ol with seichel midas is that way. We're not talking about, for example, ava atzmis of a parent to a child. That doesn't need seichel. That's a biological built-in wiring, hard wiring. It's hardware, not software. We're talking about in the software level. So what do we have? Seichel and midas. Seichel is intelligence, and midas is emotions. Hari ima midas lo yeh musig ha-seichel. Im b'midas, sorry. If within the emotions lo yeh musig ha-seichel, if within the emotions it wouldn't understand that all the seichel, the intelligence, lo yeh seidus ha-midah. There wouldn't be the stimulation, the awakening, the arousal of an emotion. So let's just use an example. The Rambam's example. Ketzid yavei adam la'avasei lirasei. In talking about the laws of how you ava v'yira, love and awe of God. So he says, how do you come to loving God? So he says, kishi is bainin, when a person will contemplate on nature, on the greatness of creation. That, and they say, look at the art. From that you come to love the artist. That's the seichel midah relationship. So what does that mean? That the midah is being stimulated by the seichel, and the midah respects and appreciates what the seichel is coming to. If it didn't appreciate it, then there's no, if it's yesh ma'ayin, then it's not a midah. The midah is appreciated. Now it's true. The midah is not a mind. The midah is not intellect. The emotion is not intellect, but the emotion is appreciating. Basically, the seichel is able to communicate to the emotion. This is something worthy of loving, worthy of appreciation. Yeah. So the midah, therefore, if it didn't have lo yeh musig ha-seichel, there'd be no midah. Midah doesn't work by emunah. It's not by faith. The midah is appreciating, responding to in some way to what the seichel is saying. I mean, a very basic level. If I came to you and I said to you, listen, I want to introduce an idea to you. It's a really special idea. It's a thing I think you should get involved in. So I give you and say, tell me. And I start explaining to you. This is the cause, this is the purpose, and this. What do you want from me? And I tell you, I want you to participate financially or volunteer or become part of it in some way. So what's happening? My seichel is explaining to your seichel, and your seichel is, and you say, then suddenly you say, you know what? I like what you're saying. I like it. I'm drawn to it. I'm attracted to it. So the ilah here is the seichel. The olul is the midah, the emotion, and they have a very direct communication to each other, one speaking to the other, even though they're two different entities. And if it wasn't there, the olul, the core, the effect would not happen. There wouldn't be a seidus hamidah. Raka idei hasogas haseichel sheba b'leiv. It's only through the comprehension of the mind that comes, that arrives, that transmits to the heart, or that enters the heart. Dafke, explicitly through this, who is Seder Samida, is the awakening or the stimulation of the emotion, the respective emotion that's emerging from this seichel. The same thing could be the opposite, by the way. Your seichel could tell you this is a thing you should stay away from. So you get repelled. You're repelled by it. So any midah, just different examples. V'zeh inyan bina liba uba halev maven. Okay. The expression bina liba, like the bina liba. What does bina liba mean? The bina of the heart, the discerning heart, is sometimes the word. The understanding heart. Now, heart and understanding are not the same thing. Uba halev maven, and that the lev understands. How could you use the word havana, bina, on a heart? Like when we say v'yadaita hayem v'hashavesa levavecha, that you shall know das v'hashavesa, and you shall apply it or internalize it, or what other word would I say? Hashavesa, to your heart. Dafka to that is the birth of the emotion. So that's what bina liba means. Obviously, bina chachma, bina das, as in seichel, is not lev. But bina liba, there's a part of bina that influences and impacts. So bina liba means the heart that's based on the understanding. So the ilah v'olul come together in that sense. Ubahalev maven. Yeah. Now, obviously, an emotion could also not follow intelligence. A person could just follow their impulses and completely not follow bina. So it's not a guarantee. But the point is, when they do communicate, they communicate in a way that is a commensurate and revealed to one another, to the mind, to the heart. That's ilav olul. Now, of course, the ilav olul, there's a lot of other examples, but this is the example he's using here. I think it's enough. I don't think we need to elaborate more. If we do, please point it out, and I'll explain it further. But now we're going to go, what about yesh ma'ayin? So by yesh ma'ayin, one second, right at the beginning of this volume, didn't he speak about the 4 different relationships? What were they? Hel, Megillah, yesh ma'ayin, that's responsible. No, he didn't mention ilva ol. There were yesh ma'ayin, Gilead, Helam. That was what yeah. Gilead Helam is sometimes equated with ilva ol. I just wanted to see if he says that. I don't think so. Okay. Okay, now yesh ma'ayin. Aval, however, b'yesh ma'ayin hu lehepech. Yesh ma'ayin, when you say a yesh emerges from an ayin, or the ayin creates the yesh, it's the opposite way. Lehepech. It's the opposite. She'im yi hizgalus ha'ayin ba'yesh. We just said, if there was no hizgalus of mayach into lev, liba bina, bina liba, there'd be no midah. There'd be no effect if the cause was not revealed into the effect. Revealed. By yesh ma'ayin, it's the opposite. If there would be the revelation of the ayin in the yesh, he is galus ayin. Im she'im ye is galus ayin by yesh, she'im musig by yesh. That there'd be revealed. What does revealed mean? That the yesh would relate to it and be understood by the yesh. Lo yisavas hanivra b'chinas yesh. You wouldn't have the creation of a creature in a state of a yesh. That's the focus. Remember, yesterday I said, it doesn't say you can't create something, but it won't be a nivra, it won't be a yesh. Meaning its own independent identity and its own self-contained self and all that. And that, as I said, that's the basic explanation. So the yesh, for it to be a yesh, it's predicated on the ayin being concealed from the yesh. Even though it's there, it's islapsus, but not in a way that is conscious. Yeah. Essentially saying this, that if the body was if the neshama was bizgalus in the body in a revealed way, in a way that the body can relate to, like seich lamida, the body would not be the body we know. It wouldn't have the capacity to just be physical. It would see itself like essentially being all the time a vehicle for the neshama. I mean, he doesn't say this explicitly, but I'm just spelling it out. It wouldn't be a yesh as we know it. Because you could have
it's
a body.
The neshama is not creating the body. It's not meduyek, the moshel.
But that's not what he's saying here. He's not talking about creating. He's talking about the element of being a yesh. It's true, the soul doesn't create the body, but so what? But the koyach halaki that does create the body is also concealed in the body.
Right.
The point is, if it was revealed, it wouldn't be able to be a yesh, a separate entity.
Ilul ve'olul is not a separate entity. That's why you need the ilul.
Well, you need it's revealed. It's revealed.
Yep, but it's the same entity.
Well, I would say otherwise. I would say it's separate entities, but the seichel does not create the heart. We have emotional capacity before the seichel influences the heart. So it's only shaping the heart. It's like when the seichel doesn't create the lev. It creates which direction the lev should be neta, should be drawn.
Right.
Yes,
The direction, right. The direction, not the heart.
Yeah. But I don't think so far he's not really emphasized creation part. He didn't say there'd be no bria. He says it wouldn't be a yesh. One second. Okay. Good.
Because a yesh is a new entity.
I don't think that's correct. Just because it's a new entity. So what? So why can't it be Beis Galus, the power of the force that made it new? Why can't it be revealed?
Because it's not a real entity. When it's mechuse, it feels like an entity.
So that's the point. It's yeshus. For it to have yeshus, to have its own self-contained identity, if it was revealed, it wouldn't have that aspect. Let's continue. Let's see what he says here now. Well, lechein, and that's why be'elam habriya, in the world of bria, not Yitzir Asi, he's talking about specifically bria, after Atzilus. In the world of bria, shu b'chinas kiruv, which is in a state of kiruv. Remember, in Atzilus, you don't call it a nivra altogether. In Atzilus, the spheres are iyu v'chayu echad, iyu v'gamu echad. You and your energies are one, you and your containers are one. Atzilus, chesed of Atzilus is not called a nivra, it's called a netzal. Why? Because it's a complete merkava, it's just a divine attribute. In Bria, you already say the word nivra, but still, Bria is close. The kiruv, like he says now, we're going to explain, it's in a state of kiruv. It's not like an asiya, which we'll talk about soon. Umeir shama ayin begili yeser. So though Bria, the Ilma Bria is yesh ma'ayin, not gilia helam, like it is Atzilus, nevertheless, the Bria there, the ayin is sensed more in Bria. So it's because it's still more kiruv. As we go down the worlds, the ayin will be more and more concealed to the point that you won't feel any sense of creation. He's going to explain, but let me just say a few words before we read inside. The difference between, let's say, we spoke about a neshama and a malach, remember? The neshama is a keli lelakus, like Avram Avinu. Comes down to earth. His whole role, he's a merkava. All he is a container, a vehicle for divine, for the elikus, for godliness. A malach is shluchei shefa. He's a messenger of the divine. Malachim generally are not Natsilis. They're in Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. So what would be the difference between a neshama of Atzilus and a malach of Bria? They're both divine creatures. The difference would be one is completely bottled, like the keli to the oir, pnimis keli to the oir. That's all it is. It doesn't have its own identity. A nivra has already an identity, but in Bria, the identity is completely aligned with what God wants. Then you have a nivra that's not aligned altogether. That's in Yetzirah, Asiyah, especially in Asiyah, Gashmi, and Chumri. So Bria, you don't say Bria is a world where the Nivraim are doing whatever they want. They're entities. They're not completely one with Elokus, but they also don't have any other agenda. So it's basically a yesh shebatel. That's what it says. A yesh misha oyev, for example. There's something there, but it's dedicated. So that's what he's going to explain. It's a nivra where the ayin is more revealed in it. In other words, the malachim sense godliness, and yet they're nivroim. And then as you go lower, the nivroim sense less and less and less. Atzilus is not about sensing. Atzilus is just another, it's a divine arm, a divine leg, a divine chesed. D'raya yamina, d'raya smela. Okay, so here's what he says now. That's why in the world of Bria, Shubchin is Kiruv, which is in a state of Kiruv Telekus, to godliness. It's a Bria, but it's Kiruv. Umeir Shama Ayin Begili Yeser, and there the Ayin Eliki, that is the creative force, is radiates in a more revealed way. And the parentheses, he says what that means. It's only in a way that it's aware of the existence of Elokus, Ayin, I should say. In Atzilus, you don't say it this way, it's Asagas Samachus. It is the Ayin. In Atzilus, you don't say Yesh and Ayin. You say Elokus in each sphere. In Bria, you already have a Nivra, but it senses and Yediyas HaMetzias, it's at least aware of the Ayin. And that's why Eina B'Bchinis Yesh Mamish. And that's why in Elam HaBria, which is Kiruv, and it senses more of the Ayin in a form of knowing its existence, it's not Mamish Yesh. Just like we said before, Ayin Mamish, he's now saying Yesh Mamish. Rak B'Bchinis Efsharius HaMetzias Keneda. Only in a state of a possible existence. I'll explain that in a minute. But I want to just read another two lines. I'll go back to it in a minute. For it to become, in order for it to be a yesh mamish, that's only possible through the concealment, the covering of the divine energy, divine power. Okay. We're going to go now to our Rosh Hashanah piece in the parentheses, but before that, let me explain. When we talk about, let's say, Oyer and Atzmus, Oyer and Etzem, Oyer and Moyer, the sunlight and sun, what would you call that? Yesh Ma'ayin, Gili Ahelim, or Ilav Olol, or Etzem and Ispashtus? We definitely wouldn't call it Yesh Ma'ayin. Sunlight coming from the sun is not Yesh Ma'ayin. First of all, the sunlight and the sun have a lot in common. It's not like it's a mystery. The sun is not an ayin, like no substance. The sun is a moyer, a mokir, and the oyer is only a reflection. But they're very much relate to each other. So very much, I don't know if we call it ilav olul per se, but it's definitely not yesh ma'ayin. It's not helam and gilui. I'm sorry, let me correct myself. It's not that the source is Behelim in the creation. Ayin, I'm sorry, Oyed is completely bottled to the source. So it actually senses the source. It's like we said, he doesn't use that here because it's not really ill of olul, but it's the same idea. The light is completely aware of its source. Same thing with Oyed Ruchni. You're talking about Oyed Ein Sof. Oyed Ein Sof, to say that it's not aware of its source, of course it's aware. The reason it's called Ayin, as we learned from the point of view Yesh Amiti, because it's not Tefes Mokim. I know you could right away jump on this, and I'll qualify right away. 1 second. Legabe Atzmus, because nothing, Atzmus is not defined even by Oyed, the truth is that Eid Ein Sof, Legabe Atzmus is also a form of Yesh Ma'ayin, because Atzmus is a complete mystery. It's a different entity altogether. But I'm not talking about that aspect. Beyond that, Oyed
Not Shemesh ve'oyer.
Huh?
Shemesh ve'oyer is not so.
Right, correct. So, okay. Now, in the Seder Shtalshlus, the higher levels of Seder Shtalshlus are aware and fully aware of their source. So, for example, Ak is aware of is aware of their source, their Oyed. Even Atzilus, which is like the first complete world, it's Eris and Kalim, as I said, Iyu v'chayu ichad, Iyu v'garmu ichad. It's essentially an extension, an emanation of the divine. That's where the word Atzilus comes from. Vayetzel min haruach. In Balescha, where Hashem says to Moshe, when the Jews were asking for meat, and Moshe said, Ma'ayin libasi, he said, Vayeh. So the Eibishter emanated. He took from Ruach, from the spirit of Moshe, and essentially imparted it to the Zkenim. That's Atzilus. As soon as you say the word Bria, Bria means there's a disconnect. It's not just a flow. Something new has been introduced. And this newness is an independent entity. So it's contingent on the ayin being concealed to some extent. However, there's levels of how much it's concealed. So in the world of Bria, he's saying, since it's the first world, it's just beginning to take shape of a separate entity. So there is Bechinas Kiruv, and the ayin is sensed to some extent, at least Yediyah Samitzias, it's aware of its existence, not Mahus. And that's why you don't call it a Yesh, because there's still the sense of the divine energy within it. Now, what is Efshalus
Samitzius?
That's what I'm going to explain. So what does Efshalus Samitzius mean? So back in the beginning of this volume, I believe there was a whole page where he discussed Efshalus Samitzius. I think it was page, 647, Tafresh Mem Zayin. So there we gave a whole explanation of what means Efshalus Samitzius. So it means the following. I'm just seeing if there's any ACs that we could use here. So Efshalus Samitzius means being that God wanted everything to be progression, as we've talked about, step by step, he doesn't just make poof, Bria Yesh Ma'ayin, and now you have a world like we have it here. Physical world with a sun and a moon and a sky and an earth and plants. He makes it in the gradual progression. And again, I use the example of pregnancy. At the moment of conception, what happens? You don't have a full-blown child. You have a cell that will then multiply and divide slowly, slowly. As the pregnancy develops, the fetus will develop into first the head, arms, leg, as we see, until after 9 months, you have a full child. Why? God couldn't do it in one jump, but he wanted everything to be in a rational progression, step by step. A seed in the ground doesn't just grow into a tree. First, it's planted, then it begins to deteriorate. And as it becomes part of the earth, the koyach hatzmicha causes it to start to blossom. First a sapling, and then it grows further and further and further. So if you think about it, before conception, you can call it, it's not there yet. But once there's a cell, would you call it Mitzias Hayesh? Or would you call it the early stages of the Mitzias Hayesh? That's essentially what Bria is. It's the beginning of a development. And why is it called Afsharius HaMitzias? Because spiritually speaking, it's not yet a shaped, formed entity. We've gone into the state of a possibility of an entity. Even al pi halacha, till a child is 30 days old, you don't call it a bar kayama. There's reasons. Why? Because there's a being, even though there's a physical child there. I'm just giving it as an example. Now, especially if you go back to conception stage, you could see a situation where the beginning of a birthing, it's not yet the new Mitzias, but it's no longer Ayin either. So it's the beginning of a Yesh emerging.
You think it's Meduyak? Because by the conception, it's out of the Efshalos. It's not a developed.
Well, that's why I gave the halacha of a bar nafla. That it's not a bar kayama, because in Inyan, yes, it's just an example. It means to say, to call it a full-bodied, it's like when Torah says the concept of chazakah. Well, the first time you do it is not good enough. Why do you need 3 times? Because it's still not a dover kayam. I'm just giving an example. Obviously, it's not exact. So Bria Afsharis HaMitzias can be explained many ways. I'm giving one example that is the beginnings. It's not Mitzias yet, but it's not Mitzias either. Now, you can explain it in many ways. You can explain it as hiyuli, as potential. You can explain it like a cell. It's all different ways of explaining it. It's mishalim. I'm not giving an exact example. Remember, Yitzira is also not a physical entity. So we're not talking about physicality. We're talking about the beginning of the concept of Mitzias. Yitzira is a shape. Real physicality will only happen in Asiya Gashmis. Bria is not Gashmisdik. So it's not like Bria Yitzira Asiya 3 steps in Gashmis. I'm trying to give an example. Even in the Gashmisdik world, you could see 3 stages of development. If you want to speak pure spiritually, you would say Atzilus is a state of Ayin, relatively speaking. But Bria is the beginning of a Yesh, of Shari Mitzias. So it's not total Ayin, Hedra Mitzias, and it's not yet Mitzias. In Yetzirah, you say it begins to become a Chemer with a Tzura. So some places explains that Bria is like Chemer, like raw matter. Think of like a raw piece of clay. What's Afsharius? Not the clay. The clay is there, but it's an Afsharius to shape it into a pot. So you can't call it yet a pot. You call it the Afsharius of making a pot, but you have the raw material. That's also one of the ways it's explained. It's a few ways that Bria is explained. In relation to what we're discussing, the point is that it's the early stages where you can't call it a full-blown yesh. Just like a fetus, just like this one cell is not a full-blown yesh. No way. It doesn't have any independent identity. Actually, the first 9 months, as long as the child's in pregnancy, doesn't even have an independence altogether. It's like it's like another rib of the mother. It's like a organ of the mother. So my point is, you have to. We can't describe this physically. We have to describe it spiritually and conceptually. That it's a state where the yesh is not a full-blown yesh, but you can't say it's like Atzilus where there's nothing at all. So that's what he's just coming to explain, that the gilui of the ayin in the yesh is necessary for it to be a true yesh. In Bria, the gilui is only limited, so that's why it's only Afsharius hayesh, so to speak, Afsharius hamitzias. However you explain those words, okay? Look, I'm using the halachas for a reason, because when you say halachically a child till day 30 is still not a bar kayam, meaning saying for sure it's going to continue, and what after 30 days we know for sure also God can do anything. But we mean in Elam Hazeh, the child has now demonstrated enough. Those 30 days demonstrate that the child has the healthy elements of what's the word I want to call sustainability. Like anything, you hire someone for a job, you give them a trial, and then you see, can they really do it? Why? Until bar mitzvah even, or bas mitzvah, a child is not mechuyev b'mitzvahs. They're not bar anshe. Why? Because they're not yet responsible. You can't expect a child. My point is there are stages till you become a full. When does a person, a human being, become a full-blown yesh? Anybody wants to serve here as a example? When would you say you became a full yesh, a complete developed yesh? At age 15, at age 12, at age 20, at age 40? That's the point I'm trying to make here. That existence doesn't mean yesh. He's trying to say here a yesh that requires that the lakus is begoli. You can't be a yesh. If God revealed himself right now within you, you think you'd have the capacity to be an independent entity? It would not be possible. Besides, the gili itself would so-called burn us up, like he says, if the eye could see the divine, it would cease to be. Not necessarily burn up, it would just cease to be, because the whole thing is the ayin eliki, which is also part of this explanation, that the whole yesh is predicated on the concealment, because if not, what's the true mitzias of a yesh? Elikus. In il of alul, the true mitzias of the yesh, of the alul, is not the ilah. Emotions are there without a mind. The mind stimulates and therefore creates it. That's beferish through revelation. The whole mitzias of the yesh is that it's not reflecting its source. I'm sorry, the whole mitzias of the yesh is really a lakus. So the only way that the yesh can be a yesh is that a lakus should be concealed. It's another explanation in addition to what I said before. Okay. So what the bottom line is? The bottom line is that the slapshus of the ayin and the yesh remains an ayin, a unknown ayin, because of a different entity, because the yesh does not have a gili of the ayin within it. It doesn't relate to it. That's what the whole point was, that the nivra ain't a masikas ayin alaki. Okay. Now, because Rosh Hashanah is coming, I think it's very fitting to read the parentheses. Well, we would have read it anyway, but let's read it together. And you see now how the Rebbe Rashab is starting to connect this Maimer to Rosh Hashanah. Remember, it's a Rosh Hashanah Maimer. So here's what he says. So just to sum up my own mind. So essentially, why do we say that that for it to be a yesh, you need to conceal the divine? I explained that, one, because you don't have independent self without the concealment. It would be too bottled to alakus. And two, because the real mitzias of a yesh is really alakus. So either alakus is revealed, then there's no yesh. And the only way for the yesh to be a yesh is through the concealment. And maybe Haba Hatalia, both points I just made. They're interconnected, obviously. Okay. Uber Rosh Hashanah, continuing, Onu Muvakshim, we request, on Rosh Hashanah, we request in davening, V'yeda kol pol ke'ata pa'alte. Every pole, every product, every creation should know ki'ata, that you, God, are the producer of it. You created it. You made it. You produced it. And then he says, V'yavin chulu. Is that the Lashon in davening? 1 second.
Yeah. וידע כל פועל כאתו פעלתו, ויובין כל יצור כאתו יצר.
Right. Okay, good. But he stops after V'yavin. Because he doesn't just want to go into Bria, Pu'ula, and Yitzira here. The point is that our request is that the creation should recognize the creator within it. So he's going to explain now. We just said that on its own, the yesh is not masig, does not sense the creative energy. On Rosh Hashanah, we request it. So he's going to say now what that means. V'hainu, what's our bakasha? What's the request? Sheyiyeh musag u'murgash hakayach eliki. That the creation should be musag, understood, and murgash, felt, sensed, the divine kayach, the divine power, the divine the energy. Hainu. So he's not asking it as a question, but he's qualifying, as you'll see. This means la'achesh shenisavu yochel liyas yediv asogel yenu yeser. So in a way, he is asking. You just told me that the creation is based on the concealment. So what are we requesting? So he's saying the creation is based on the concealment. But then, after it's created, it's possible for the creation to grow in its awareness. So though upon creation, we don't have the yedekol pol ki'ata falta, but that's what we're requesting, that you could have a higher level of aware perception and understanding. So that's what he's saying. Basically, Rosh Hashanah, we're coming to say, yes, we're a yesh. A yesh on its own does not comprehend and relate to the ayin. That's why it's called ayin. But that's what we're asking. We're praying that we want to recognize and perceive and understand the ayin. That's what he's saying right now. He's going to explain now. In other words, the difference between, remember, I kept on pointing out throughout that most of the Maimer here, we're learning about the creation process, not what happens through Avodah. Now we're talking Avodah now. In the creation process, as we discussed, everything there's the ayin of the Yesh Amiti, ayin of Yesh Anivra. Now we learned that the Yesh does not relate to the ayin, even though the ayin is within it. But through Avodah, we can reach, obviously, deeper levels of, and that's Taka the Kavon. As it's known what it says in Eitz Chaim. Be'inyan hamshachas hakav. So he's now going to quote and compare this to Rosh Hashanah Tefillah. So what does it say in Eitz Chaim about the transmission of the kav? Remember, the kav is the narrow stream of energy that flows after the tzimtzum from the Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. It's nagei v'davuk. It's touched and attached to the Ein Sof. And that's the narrow flow, like the paintbrush that creates and shapes and energizes all of existence. So what does he say about the Amshachas HaKav in Eitz Chaim? He says like this. Oh, he doesn't even say what it says there. I thought he's going to say.
Probably, I don't know if I'm right, that before there was Eris of Mamali Kol Mokem Cholol, it has to be Tzimtzum, and then there was Hamshachas HaKav. So in Eitz Chaim is asking for what purpose we need the Tzimtzum v'Tziluk legamrei, and then Hamshachas HaKav. He could leave a little bit lechatchila. So he said, no, first it has to be the Tzimtzum, and then Hamshachas HaKav. This is what he's saying here also.
Correct.
Lechatchila, if there would be the ayin, there's no sin smoking for a yesh.
That's correct.
I'm right?
Yeah, you're right. I think you're right. Yeah. In other words, yeah. In the beginning of Eitz Chaim, he asked the question: if at the end of the day you're going to be mamshech kav anyway, so why not leave just the kav? Tzimtzum doesn't have to completely be silent. Just leave a kav. So he says because there'd be no room for kelim. If the ayin of Eliki would remain in the context here, the yesh could not become. So you need complete concealment. Then comes the kav, and now it can grow. And you can grow in your awareness. That's the whole point of the kav. Now that we have a kav, now we can, there's kalim. It's like the teacher has to be completely silent before a new student because the student will be overwhelmed even with a kav. So there's silence. Then there's the keli of the student emerges. There's the yesh. Now you have a yesh, an independent yesh. Then the ayin and the kav can begin to flow and we can begin to grow. And we could say now, once I'm a yesh, now I can receive the kav and the other kopol. And that will help me understand what the ke'ata fa'alta. That's correct. That's good. Yeah. But Pashtus, that's what he's referring to. So that answers it. Initially, you must have the ayin concealed completely, and then you can grow. Then the student can grow from Ayin Beis to Mishnah, to Mikra, to Mishnah, to Gemara, to the point that he can appreciate the teacher in his full glory. Good. Very good. The idea of Asagazu, and this perception, this knowledge, and this comprehension, hu b'neshamis. Neshamis come to this. In other words, it's not every creature can arrive to this point. It's almost like a second explanation. First, he's explaining that initially it's yesh, and then later, like the kav, you grow. And now he's saying it's dafka neshamis. For example, animals don't have this. The yesh of the world is not so, but there you could say they have a different awareness. But he's not saying that explicitly, but he's saying it's dafka neshamis.
Even Goyim.
Yeah, why not? Rosh Hashanah is the birthday of the entire human race.
Or Paul.
Remember, the concept of Jew and Goy, technically, halachically, only began at Matan Torah. Before that, everybody was Goyim. Ukamoy shehem begufim, as these neshamas are within bodies, sheyechelim liris ha'ayin aleki. So the idea of Asagazu b'neshamas, ukamoy shehem begufim, sheyechelim liris ha'ayin aleki. As they are in bodies, they're capable of seeing the ayin aleki. So he's basically explaining that even though initially the yesh, the ayin, remember the whole reason is why is it called ayin? Because it's beyond us. We can't comprehend it. That's initially. But afterwards we can grow, and he's saying now neshamis can grow. And he's going to say, he's going to bring a raya. Actually, the raya I mentioned before, he's using now to make the case, like it says in Sefer Shalbenim. Ayin Beis, the Sheshar Yuchid V'Amuna. The Rebbe explains that in some places the whole Tanya is called Sefer Shalbenim, even though technically Sefer Shalbenim is only Likutei Amorim, it's only the first chelik. But often the Rabbeim will refer to Tanya in general, Sefer Shalbenim, Ayin Beis, which is Sheshar Yuchid V'Amuna, She'im Nitna Reshus La'ayin. If permission was given for the eye to see, Hayorein es Ayin Aleki. We would see the divine ayin. So we see from this that it's possible. I right away wonder how he's bringing the Shaykh of the Amunah, because the whole point why we don't show it, the whole point of Shaykh of the Amunah is that we can't, that yes, if we saw it, the whole yesh would be bottled. That's why we're not shown it. Now he's bringing a zaraya that technically we could see it. It's an interesting diuk, because when you read Shaykh Amunah, the statement is not meant to tell us that we can grow through Avodah to see it. The statement is meant to say the opposite, that the yesh would not exist if the ayin was revealed. So maybe the Rebbe Rashab is seeing like a hint. The fact that the Alter Rebbe says nit reshus means that through Avodah there's a possibility that we should actually ultimately see it. So even though the pshat in Shaykh Amunah is the opposite, to tell us the yesh can't exist if there was an ayin. But since the Alter Rebbe says it, the Rebbe Rashab says, but with Aveda, we could end up having an element of the ayin, the neshama seeing it. It's interesting. You see the point I'm making? Because if you look at Shaykh V'Amunah, the point is there the exact opposite than what he's saying here. There, the point is actually supports that it's an ayin and it's beyond us. And now he's bringing it that, so to speak, a neshama can. Okay, it's a deeper way of understanding Shaykh V'Amunah.
What does that mean that the neshama sees it, understands it? I mean, is that us with our moyach, or is it? I mean, what does that mean? Neshama is always, at least the higher parts, is always seeing things that we don't see. What does that mean?
We're talking about the avodah of neshamas begufim. We're not talking about neshamas in heaven. We're talking about the soul below, because we have a soul with avodah. That's why we ask on Rosh Hashanah that we should perceive it. The neshama has an aguf, that we should be conscious and aware. We.
So, our moyach, okay.
Not the moyach. No, who does it say moyach?
But it's
Neshama beguf. It could be midas. It could be midas too. I mean, the word is v'yeda kopal, yeda. It basically means awareness, that we should have awareness. As look, we have awareness of the soul in the body has awareness of certain things. We don't have awareness of other things. We're asking and we're working toward having awareness of this divine energy within us.
Musag umorgash. It did not say lirois. She musag umorgash. Our prayer is she musag umorgash akoyach aleki.
Well, then by the neshama, he added lires.
He is explaining that this is only by neshama is the atzilus lirois.
No, we didn't read the next line yet, so we'll read it now. You're jumping ahead. We didn't read, so don't. You can't do that.
No,
That's
but here,
called cheating.
if you are medayek here, le'achar shenishabu yochoi liyos yedio vehasogo el
And
yoyin
then to
oyetz.
medayik further, he says that this yediyah sog is by neshamas, that as they are in bodies, they're capable lires ha'ayin alaki, like he brings from Tanya. That's where we're up to right now. So basically, he said we asked for us to understand and feel it, yeah, and we're that through avodah you can reach that, even though initially it's concealed. And it says by neshamas, that neshamas, this yediyah nasog is by neshamas who have the capacity to see the ayin eliki, and he brought the proof from Shaykh V'Amunah. Now we're going to continue. Hine. Now, to explain this further, Hine ben neshamas the atzilas, neshamas of atzilas, souls from atzilas. Yesh behem riyazu k'moy shem begufin lamata. They have this vision the way they are in bodies below. So neshama datzilas in this world has this level of vision of the ayin eliki. The ima yesim royim harihem eskayim begufam. That's the Shaykh V'Amunah. And though they see it, they still remain and retain their existence in bodies. In other words, they're not parcha nishmasa. It's not like they die, they expire. Kles nefesh.
Which is how to explain. Because how could they feel the goof if the ayin? But that's what he's saying.
Well, I'm here to explain. I will explain. V'hainu, but I don't want. But I want to read the whole thing before we explain. V'hainu, this means the achesh and esavu, after they were created, nevertheless they can see the divine ayin. Umakolshkein, and for sure, that's even seeing. For sure, that's capable for them to have the perception, the knowledge of it, and akara recognition. V'yeda or v'yada kol Paul. And this is what we say, v'yada kol Paul.
V'yeda kol Paul.
V'yeda kol Paul. So it's referring to this capacity of a neshama to both understand and even see for neshamas d'atzilus, as it is in a body, the divine Ayin Alaki. Let me continue to the end of parentheses before I explain. Ukamoishu b'klolos hanivroim. This is neshamas datzilis, and the way it is by klolos hanivroim, the general creatures. Yediazu hu be'efen hametzias sheyir la'osid. Ukamoishu hu b'klolos hanivroim. Yediazu be'efen hametzias. Yeah, and for klolos hanivroim, this is the manner of the existence as it'll be in the future. In other words, we can't achieve it now. Shayesh yir elikus, the yesh will be divine. The yir by hasagus mekere, and it will have within it a comprehension of its source. B'bchinas hasagus hamahus mamish, not yedias hametzias, complete comprehension of the very existence of elikus. Ukamesha Kosov, Venigla, and the pasuk goes, Nigla Kved Hashem, V'ro Kol Basar, and all flesh will see, Ro, Ki Pi Hashem Diber, that the mouth of God speaks, the way the mouth of God speaks. Okay.
This is mitzad nimna hanimnois, mistamer, right?
No. Don't you think the Rebbe Rashab knows how to use nimnam nimnois when he wants to? Nimnam nimnois is never used unless the Rabbeim use it. You don't throw that in ever, just for the record.
So explain how is it possible?
If you let me speak, I'll explain. So briefly, we'll elaborate more tomorrow. I'll just be brief because we're already time. First, let me explain Pshat before we explain Havana. That's the way we go here. So firstly, what is he saying in the Maimer here? I'm not going to process. I'm going to explain what the Maimer, the Rebbe Rashab said. I want to discuss something to add in this parentheses. He came to add the following, that though he said, remember, the whole theme here is the idea that the ayin, what the meaning of ayin is, after we explain the ayin from the perspective of the boira, of the yesh amiti, what is the ayin from our perspective? So he said two things. It's not a mitzias davar, and it's not musag, it's not comprehended by the nivroim. That's why we call it ayin, yesh ma'ayin. The parentheses comes to qualify a very important thing. Something I've spoken about a lot in the previous classes, but till now, the Rebbe Rashab and the Frierdiker Rebbe and Tzadik Dal did not make reference to the avodah of it. All that we've spoken about is creation. Yesh amiti, ayin amiti, the ayin of the yesh hanivra, the yesh hanivra. That whole process, three interpretations. But if you remember, I kept on pointing out, so what's going to be later? Through avodah, we retrace the steps. This is all mamay lamata, from God creating in an organized and structured way. But ultimately, the goal is going to be to retrace that the yesh hanivra is going to become one with the yesh amiti through traveling through the ayin. So now he's addressing that. He's addressing the process of how we reconnect. And the reconnection process is what we asked for in Rosh Hashanah. It's exactly right. Why do we ask for it? Because that's our Aveda. We're seeking something that on its own wouldn't be there. Why do we have to say V'yeda Kol Pol? We could say it'll come automatically. No, because that's the whole kavana, that even though we are a yesh, and the ayin is a mystery and beyond us, we are seeking and requesting help to begin to relate to this ayin, essentially to relate to Elokus. That's the central theme of this parenthesis. And he says specifically that through Aveda we can get there, like the Hamshachas HaKav. After the Kav is there, the student can begin to grow. And we get closer and closer to the point where we can have perception. Yediyah v'asaga, neshamas can have Yediyah v'asaga in the ayin, and even Riyah. Except by Riyah he qualified that now Bisman has a Riyah and brings the proof from Shaykh Ramuna. The difference is now Riyah is possible only by a Neshamas of Atzilus. Because they themselves, the Neshama is so refined. So therefore, even as they're in bodies, the body does not completely conceal Elikus from them. With the rest of us, through all the years of Aveda, of refining our physical bodies and our physical existence, will become Kalim to relate to the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, but even to the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti. It doesn't say that here yet. But and all the way to Atzmus itself. So basically, because Atzmus created everything, and everything has embedded in it all the levels, so the fact is, as we learned, Tzimtzum b'shvil hagili. So even though the Tzimtzum is a very powerful concealment, but we have the power to transform it through Aveda. As we transform the Tzimtzum, which is what conceals the Ayin in the first place, we're able to relate to the Ayin. So it's the same question you can ask: how can we have a unity between post-Tzimtzum and pre-Tzimtzum? The answer is we transform the Tzimtzum, the Nefesh Habamis. So our Aveda can actually eliminate the concealment of the Yesh and ultimately recognize the Elikus within the Yesh, and then ultimately become one with it and with the highest possible levels. That's what Aveda accomplishes.
And remain in group.
Without Riyah,
And
only
remain in group.
On its own, we cannot, because that's the way it was created. But once we are here, once there's the Tzimtzum and there's a complete independent entity, we can grow to the highest levels. That's the whole point of the interface, that we can connect higher and higher with neshamas begufim. Now, there's levels where we reach through comprehension, through our minds, through and hergish, and to the point even riyah, v'nigla kved Hashem is riyah, v'ro, to the point that we actually can perceive. But that's only possible through all the Aveda that we've done. I've said this, how many times have I spoken about connecting to Atzmus? Only after you go through all the levels, and with the right bittul, you ultimately can connect to the highest levels without becoming eliminated, because you worked on it.
So
That's
we
the
become a neshama Atzilus at that time. As we go up, we become each of us regular folk become a neshama of Atzilus, and then we can have the
You don't have to become a neshama of Atzilus. You could stay a neshama of Asiya. It's the work of refining existence, real Aveda, allows you to appreciate deeper levels of Elikus. This is not a lottery or a magic. This is Avodas Hashem. You're forgetting the most important thing, the work. You have to work on this. This is the work that we do. When we work, askafia, ishapcha, every step of effort refines the body. Remember, the body is not evil. The body is only concealment. You can work on not allowing it to be a concealment. That's the whole point of the whole interface. Concealment is not an end in itself. If you define the body as just an end in itself, it's just dead end concealment, yeah, you have a problem. But the body is a creation of God's. It's just a creation that the Father concealed himself from his child, waiting for us to reveal him. So when you reveal in your life godliness instead of selfishness, you actually are allowing the goof to become more of a keli to elikus. That's the ultimate goal, yes. Neshama is begufim, tchis hamesim, neshama is begufim, but it cannot be done on its own. It has to be done through avodah.
But you have to, you're right 100%, but you have to explain one more thing, how you still feel the goof, like the Osid Lovoy. How is this possible? If you have this Gilui that is completely, you reach the highest, you should not feel the goof. The goof, you said before, this is the opposite.
What does it mean? Gufa
How
de
could you
lehen
feel the
kadishin.
essence?
What? Hold on. Gufa de lehen kadishin. The goof is a divine creation. What's wrong with saying that you see godliness and you'll also see the sun and the moon and the stars and the fish? You see both.
No, to feel a separate entity, yeshes. If you feel completely the external, there is no yeshes.
Who said the word separate entity? Didn't say that. He says the goof.
Because neshama is begufi means that
No, absolutely incorrect. Incorrect. A goof can be completely feel connected to God through Avodah. What you're doing is saying that it stays a yesh. No, the yesh has become refined, that it's no longer feeling that it's on its own. It is through Avodah come to recognize that it is through Avodah, not through, not as a gift. It itself becomes a merkavet alakus through its Avodah, not through mamay lamata like with the others. It's Avodah such the goof is now a goof of God's. That this goof is God's vehicle. Why is neshama more divine than the goof? Once you have the Avodah.
What is the goof? The whole
Anyway.
entire. No, Reb Simon. Give me 1 more second. The goof means that there is a helem. You don't feel elokus. So
the answer is absolutely not. Helem b'shvil hagilui. That's the goof. It's not helem, period. As long as there's no Aveda, it remains a yesh. Aveda is refines the yesh. You never heard the concept bitla yesh, zichu chayesh, aliyas. This is the point. You're talking with Aveda or without Aveda?
No,
without
even vit. I'm talking vita Aveda.
With Aveda, you can
But I hear
the goof completely. With the yesh hanivra becomes one with the yesh hamiti. Anyway, being it's late, think about it.
But this is like the oil. This is like the oil hakolol be'atzmusay.
No, it's higher. It's actually higher. The oil was never a yesh. This is a yesh. This is a mitzias dover yesh. Anyway, think about it. We got to go because I have to do a few other things. And we'll talk tomorrow. Tomorrow's another class.
Yashkoyach.
So we'll stop here at the end of parentheses, at middle of page 1152.